How are we doing, everybody, and welcome to Russell Heritage Golf. Today is the first part of our series of me basically talking about every part of the golf swing, breaking it down so that you can self-diagnose and start to fix your own golf swing. Throughout this series, all you've got to do is probably get into the habit of videoing your swing, whether you're in the garden or down the driving range, so that you know at what point something's going wrong. Now, I'm not just going to talk about every part of the swing in like the perfect detail. It's going to be talking about characteristics that are acceptable, but also talk about things which are unacceptable and potentially therefore become more faults. Now, I'm going to start off with probably the most important part, which is the posture. You know, without the posture, then you're going to start to see inconsistency in your game pretty much straight away. Now, biomechanically, we're all different set makeup, so we're all going to look slightly different in terms of how far away the arms are and all the rest of it. But generally speaking, when it comes to the pelvis, it needs to be downward facing towards the ball. That's going to be the big priority. Now, for some golfers out there, unfortunately, yes, you might sit behind an office desk, you might commute, and that means that the core becomes less active and the spine starts to become a little bit kind of curved, maybe in the wrong direction, which will have a knock-on effect to your ability to adopt a neutral posture. You need core strength to be able to tilt the pelvis, which is kind of this way and this way, to be able to find a neutral pelvis, unfortunately. So some people out there, you might just have to feel like short-term, maybe it's a little uncomfortable. You'll get into it though, right? First rule when it comes to the posture is to make sure you create a bend of the hip, which basically means as I start to push my belt buckle down towards the ground, you can see the way my hips go back. A lot of people think they do this, they go back so far and then they reach over. This rounds off the thoracic area of your spine and basically means that you can't move unless you compensate by lifting. So you have to go relatively deep, but make sure that you stay downward facing. From this position, it's a subtle bit of knee flex, only enough to feel like you're putting pressure in towards the ground, not too much so you feel like the belt buckle starts to point too horizontally. That's going to cause massive problems. You know, if you don't get the pelvis in the right position, then say goodbye to any sort of consistency relative to your ball striking and your actual swing playing. Aside from that then, all you've got to do is make sure that once you've got your posture, your width of stance, right? If you drew a line vertically through either hip bone, it should fall on the in line of the ankle. You go too narrow and then basically you're going to move over onto the leg and you won't be able to separate. You go too wide and you're never going to be able to pressure load the leg. So it's something that again is like a small detail that is pivotally important in terms of your ability to move. Once you manage to get your stance, then you make a choice in terms of your foot position. I flare my leg out, that just feels more comfortable. The reality is when we move correctly in towards the downswing as this series progresses, the foot will have to flare out anyway to help us to turn all the way through. So if you want to start that way, that's fine. If you want to start more perpendicular towards your target line, that's fine. This one has to stay perpendicular. That's an important thing. If this one flares out, then you're never going to get to a state of internal rotation. You get your posture, you've got your width of stance, you've made a choice in terms of what you want to do here, that's down to you. A little bit of advice, ball position, just tinker. I have it slightly left of centre because I kind of hit it this way. Some golfers, you'll have it more in the middle. Avoid going too far back and excessively too far forward. Relatively central or relatively in line with your sternum is absolutely fine. Alignment. Club face, yes. Feet, not necessarily, right? You don't have to have your feet perfectly parallel towards the target. You can stand slightly open because of the downward hitting nature of the golf swing. My suggestion would be, however, just make sure for the foreseeable future that you avoid standing closed because that's going to encourage you to get flicky. We're nearly there, right? We've got the idea of the pelvis being downward facing. This would keep your spine angle very neutral and means that you can rotate around your thoracic area on the spine. From here, because of the subtle amount of knee flex, you should feel like you're putting pressure in towards the ground. You've got the correct width of stance, which means your pelvis can move in between your legs. And you've decided on whatever you're going to do with your alignment of your foot and your lead foot position. The last piece of the puzzle is just the grip, right? In terms of the grip, you want to get it in the fingers, you want to get the heel pad sitting on the top on the lead hand. This helps you create wrist cock. It helps a natural rotation of the arm. It's an important feature. You want to avoid the palm entirely because then you can't create wrist cock and the lead arm will start to bend. But how much you go in the fingers and how much you rotate the hand on top of the club is down to you. If you're a beginner golfer, I would suggest to adhere to being as perfectly orthodox as you can, for the main reason when you read golf magazines and you watch potentially other YouTube channels, they normally talk about generic orthodox methodology, okay? What I'm going to do during this series is I'm not talking about just the orthodox, I'm just talking about characteristics and traits that you can also have, like I mentioned earlier. If you're an experienced golfer and you're aware that you grip it strong, that's fine, because as we progress, I will talk about the differences when it comes to the hit. But what happens in the golf swing in essence is that we're going to do things like potentially create wrist cock, and the arm is going to create a rotation to help the club stay on plane. So if you're somebody who grips it strong, just understand that your forearm has already triggered a rotation, so you don't necessarily need to increase it anymore. It'll also change coming into the hit, but we'll discuss that. Like I said, fingers, heel pad here. This hand, supporting mechanism, right? This hand, especially for right-hand dominant people like myself, you don't really want this playing too much of a role and getting too involved in the golf swing. It's going to start to cause a problem with your contact and also the club face stability. So this hand really is just a supporting mechanism to the side of the club. Okay, right palm on left thumb, side of the club. You're going to feel like the pressure's going more through the index finger as you come into the hit rather than anything else. Thumb sits down the left hand side of the handle, and that's important. If it sits down this side, then because opposable thumbs are strong, it's going to hook the face over, and that definitely will cause a problem. And I think we're good to go. I think make sure, right, even if you're quite an established golfer, just make sure you go through this checkpoint first. Without this, you're going to get lost. There's no doubt about that. You get the posture wrong, you're going to suffer in the takeaway, you're going to get the backswing wrong. If you get these things right, or at least you understand what's acceptable, then you're fine. The only place where you don't want to be reference your posture is sticking your bum out too much, because then you start to put pressure in your lower part of your spine and you can't move. Even if you feel like you're a little bit rounded, you can still get away with it. Pelvis down, flex your knees, and generally speaking, your posture is going to be absolutely fine. Now, from there we can start progressing. So make sure you're ready for the next video. As I talked about earlier, the whole point of this series is that you're going to start videoing your own golf swings. So similar to the little videos that have popped up in today's bigger video, start to video with your smartphone, similar to what I did. Get it a little tripod, so even if you're swinging in the garden or down the driving range, you can start drawing lines similar to what you've seen today on the screen. I'm going to talk about that in more detail next time. Always appreciate a thumbs up and a like, and remember, it's absolutely free to subscribe to the channel, right? Make sure you don't miss another video by pressing the bell icon, because that will notify you every time a new video comes out. And remember, it's still absolutely free to send swings into the channel, right? Basically, in the description box below, you'll see links to my social media pages, Twitter, Instagram. You send them in, I annotate them, I republish over them as soon as I can, and it just makes sure that you're moving in the right direction. But the whole point of this series is that you'll have a much better idea when you video your swing of when it's going wrong and why. A lot of golfers out there suffer in the posture, so make sure you're not one of them, and just make sure you understand that you don't necessarily need to change your grip, but just be mindful as to how you're holding it, because otherwise you might struggle. Catch up with you again soon.